Stay with me for the next few minutes because this is one of those stories that reminds you how love can grow out of ruins. We're in post-war Germany, winter 1946, a season so cold it felt hollow. Out of that winter came a quiet experiment that changed thousands of lives. German women and American GIs writing letters, finding hope in ink and paper, and stepping into marriages that diplomats called marriage diplomacy, and newspapers called scandal. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and if your family has a story from the 1940s. Subscribe, like, and share if you want more human stories from history. No myths, just the truth of people who kept going when it would have been easier to stop. The winter of 1946 didn't just chill bones, it starved the soul. Germany was a nation stripped down to its frame. Chimneys coughed smoke into a sky that seemed to have forgotten music. In market squares, boys of 8 bargained away their mothers' wedding rings for half a loaf of bread. Hands trembled not from cold, but from the shame of survival. Across cities still broken and gray, the streets belonged to widows and daughters. Nearly 3 million German men were still held in Allied camps. Another 2 million would never return. Post-war Germany was a place where women patched roofs, carried bricks, and paid for life with ration coupons. In Bavaria, the American occupation zone stretched like a promise wrapped in barbed wire. The occupiers brought flour, cigarettes, canned meat, and something else, an aura of power under clean uniforms and easy laughter. In a bombed-out schoolhouse near the main river, chalk dust mixed with frost. A 27-year-old teacher named Anna Keller wrote on the board with gloves on, breath turning visible as she formed foreign words: apple, bread, peace. Her students were orphans and hollow-eyed girls who repeated the words softly, as if afraid sound itself might vanish. When class ended, Anna wrapped her coat and walked home past the ruins of a church where she'd once been married. Her husband, Friedrich, lay somewhere in France, under a cross-marked, unknown soldier. She didn't carry hope home each night. She carried endurance. Not far away, in a queue outside an American canteen, a 24-year-old woman named Liesel Brandt stood with her ration card. Her father had been a Nazi Party clerk. Her mother unstitched uniforms to salvage cloth. Liesel had grown up pretty enough that neighbors once said she'd marry well. Now beauty was a burden. GIs whistled when she passed, tossed gum and chocolate like she was a souvenir of victory. She ignored them, but hunger sanded pride. In the attic where she slept without heat, her breath sometimes froze on her scarf. Then there was Greta Voigt, a 32-year-old widow with 2 small boys and hands cracked from chopping wood. Her husband had been conscripted by the Wehrmacht and disappeared on the Eastern Front. Greta's world had shrunk to a single job: keep the children alive, cut enough wood to make it through one more night, find potatoes, mend shoes again. When her eldest Carl asked if America had food, she answered in a voice that surprised even her. Maybe they have kindness too. By March 1946, the American occupation had entered its second year. The Marshall Plan was still a rumor in Washington. On the ground, survival ran on barter: coffee for soap, soap for bread, bread for cigarettes. And in one corner of Bavaria, an unexpected trade began: letters for love. It started quietly in a Red Cross office outside Nuremberg. A chaplain from Ohio, Robert Hayes, watched German women beg for news of missing husbands and thought about the lonely GIs posted nearby. He proposed something that sounded a little crazy: let them write to each other. Maybe words can rebuild what bombs destroyed. At first it was unofficial. Letters slipped behind stacks of relief forms, whispered into the workflow of a battered country. Then ink turned into lifelines. Not propaganda, not politics. Just human hands reaching for other human hands. Anna wrote on borrowed paper, "To any American soldier who believes peace can have a face." She told him about her classroom, her 900-calorie ration, and how she used to love poetry before everything broke. When she dropped the letter into the box, her fingers lingered as if she'd just sent away a living part of herself. Liesl refused at first. "We are not beggars," she said, though the attic was so cold her teeth chattered. After the night she watched her mother trade her wedding dress for potatoes, she finally lit a candle and wrote, "I do not ask for pity, only to know what it feels like to live without fear." She didn't sign her last name. Greta read about the Red Cross exchange in a church bulletin and hesitated. Then her son asked again about America. She copied a soldier's address from a notice board. Corporal James Tully. Weeks passed. The river thawed. Replies arrived from barracks outside Bamberg and Würzburg, letters with eagles on the stamps, ink that smelled faintly of tobacco. The Americans wrote about baseball and ration coffee, about hometowns that sounded like fairy tales, Kansas, Ohio, California. They sent photographs, clean-shaven smiles, fields of wheat, dogs that looked so well-fed they could have been myths. Anna's pen pal, Lieutenant Frank Miller, wrote with unexpected gentleness. "We all lost something," he told her. "Maybe that's why I can't stop writing to you." Liesl's correspondent, Sergeant Jack Morgan, teased her German grammar and promised he'd teach her to dance when the world stopped shaking. Greta's GI, Corporal Tully, mailed a small box of Hershey's bars wrapped in a military newspaper. Her boys stared at the chocolate as if it had been struck from gold. By June, letters had become bridge work. Across the American zone of occupation in Bavaria, more women joined in, words stitched with a strange mix of guilt and longing. For them, love wasn't a dream. It was a form of recovery, proof they could still be human. Not everyone approved. In Munich, leaflets warned that German honor is not for sale. Old loyalties whispered in taverns. The women whispered back, "We're not betraying Germany. Germany betrayed us first." Army command frowned on fraternization, unbecoming of an officer. But men who had lived through Normandy and the Bulge were tired of rule books. Some visited villages in secret, delivering food parcels from pen pals. When Liesl finally saw Jack in person, he was taller than she'd expected and laughed easily. A man who had survived something, but whose eyes hadn't forgotten it. He handed her a can of peaches. "For your mother, Fräulein," he said. She couldn't speak. She just watched sunlight settle in his hair and thought, "He is too alive for this place." Church bells started ringing again in the evenings. Not for weddings yet, but for peace services. The quiet revolution stirred anyway. Letters turned into promises. Promises turned into proposals. The U.S. military government called it cross-cultural marriage registration. Locals called it the bride parade. The press called it scandal. The women called it salvation. A train from Würzburg to Frankfurt clattered through thawing countryside carrying 17 women whose lives had already ended once and were, maybe, about to begin again. Steam billowed into the cold morning, mixing coal smoke with perfume, a blend of survival and hope. They wore second-hand dresses, sewn from curtain fabric, shoes patched with wire and string. Each woman clutched an envelope stamped with an American seal, letters of introduction, interview approvals, the kind of promises only peace dares make. Inside the carriage, laughter rose, like waves breaking on ruins. One woman drew lipstick from a crushed tube and colored her mouth with trembling pride. Another hid a rosary in her collar and whispered that God forgives strange unions in stranger times. Anna traced frost on the window, while villages without steeples slid by. Fields still littered with charred tank bones. A horizon that smelled faintly of smoke. Greta's boys slept with their faces pressed into her lap. Liesl leaned against the glass and studied her reflection, trying to remember what beauty used to mean before it had to feed the stove. Frankfurt waited with an experiment in reconciliation disguised as romance. A former officer's barracks had been turned into a screening center. It still smelled of diesel and sweat. American clerks shuffled paperwork while translators read out questions. Do you understand the nature of this marriage? Have you had political affiliations with the Nazi Party? Are you entering this union freely? Every answer was recorded in triplicate. Anna spoke carefully. Yes, I understand. No, I was not a party member. Yes, I consent. Her English was slow but clear. The lieutenant stamped her. Form with a blue seal. Behind her, Greta answered through a translator. She seeks a father for them, the translator explained, nodding toward the boys. Greta flushed but didn't look away. When Lysil's turn came, she crossed her arms. Why an American? Because German men are all ghosts, she said. The clerk blinked, then stamped. Outside in the courtyard, a gramophone crackled. Bing Crosby sang, "It's been a long, long time." The brides lined up holding papers like passports to another life. Trucks rolled in with the men who had written for months. Soldiers in crisp uniforms, polished boots, nervous smiles. They stepped down like they were walking into a dream. For the women, the sight was disorienting. Men taller than they'd imagined, healthier, their humor easy in a country rebuilt on silence. Liesl clutched her purse to steady her hands. Anna's breath caught when she saw Frank Miller step toward her, cap in hand, sunlight flashing across his ribbons. He looked younger than his letters, but his posture carried the same weary grace she recognized in her own reflection. "Miss Keller?" he asked, and his accent folded her name into something almost tender. She nodded. That night they ate a meal in a requisitioned ballroom. Long tables gleamed under dim bulbs. Powdered potatoes steamed beside tins of corned beef. For many of the women, it was the first full dinner in years. A band played Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade. Couples were encouraged to dance. Some moved stiffly, unsure, as if they had forgotten how to be free. Frank held out his hand to Anna. "May I?" She hesitated, then placed her fingers in his. "I used to dance before the war," she said quietly. "Then everything stopped." He nodded. "It stopped for me too." They turned beneath the flickering lights, two strangers orbiting the memory of what life once felt like. Across the room, Greta tucked her boys into borrowed cots, whispering, "Sleep, little wolves. Tomorrow we meet your new home." Liesl watched Jack charm a circle of officers. He caught her eye and raised his glass in a teasing toast. She almost smiled. By morning, papers were signed. Photographers snapped pictures. G.I. Mary's former enemy. The irony stung and soothed all at once. For the soldiers, these women represented forgiveness. For the women, the soldiers, meant survival. When the time came for the brides to leave, they received passports stamped wife of a U.S. citizen under Section 13 of the War Brides Act. A train waited beneath a pale sky, steam rising like ghostly confetti. Anna held Frank's arm. Greta clutched her boys. James lifted their suitcase as if it weighed nothing. Liesl stared at the empty platform and refused to cry. The whistle blew. The train lurched forward, carrying 17 women away from the ashes of Germany toward a future neither side really knew how to imagine. The Atlantic wind screamed against the hull of the USS General Black. The brides leaned over the rail with letters pressed to their coats. The ocean stretched black and white under a winter sky, a bare line between war and peace. Anna gripped the railing until her knuckles paled, watching Europe dissolve into mist. Below deck, the air was thick with salt, oil, and engine hum. The women slept in narrow bunks, each clutching the envelope that made her legal. Above them, officers smoked and told stories about girls in Kansas and Ohio. Down in the bunks, the German women whispered about ration cards, the smell of ersatz coffee, and bomb shelters where songs had once been hushed. For them, Love had begun in silence. On the sixth night, Anna climbed to the deck. Frank stood with his collar up, the sea spraying silver across his coat. "Still awake?" he asked. She nodded. "It doesn't feel real, to leave one world and step into another." He smiled faintly. That's what the war was supposed to do, end one world and start another. There was no pride in his voice, no regret, only the honesty of fatigue. They stood together for a long minute, two survivors adrift between continents, unsure which direction meant home. The Statue of Liberty rose from the fog like a promise. The ship erupted, gasps, sobs, children cheering. Women pressed their faces to the cold railings. The skyline of New York glittered, glass and steel catching sunlight like it had been polished for their arrival. On the pier, American families waved flags. Camera flashes cut through the mist. It looked cinematic. It felt unreal. At Ellis Island, immigration moved like a well-oiled machine. Names mispronounced, papers stamped, questions repeated. Occupation? Wife? Religion? Protestant or Catholic? Relatives in the United States? Only him, many answered, and the word him carried both fear and hope. A Red Cross worker handed Greta's boys tiny American flags and a handful of candy, smiling kindly but keeping a careful distance, when an observer whispered, "They're all German." Liesl heard it and filed it away. Frank took Anna's hand outside and said, "Welcome to America." The words were warm. The air smelled like gasoline, roasted peanuts, and new leather. She had imagined America in softer colors, not neon and haste. They boarded a train heading west to Kentucky. Cornfields flickered by in streaks of green and gold. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's ordinary," Frank said. He squeezed her hand. "That's what I missed." In Missouri, James's family welcomed Greta politely. Behind every smile was a little curiosity, the kind reserved for museum exhibits. At church, the pastor praised Christian charity without saying the word Germany. Greta spent her first weeks memorizing grocery aisles and measuring cups, stunned by abundance, butter, sugar, flour, each as precious as gold in her memory. At night, when James slept, she stared at the stars and whispered to the ghost of the world she'd left. Chicago roared around Liesl and Jack. Their apartment sat above a diner, with streetcars clanging and jazz spilling from windows. Jack taught her to fry eggs, tip waitresses, and smile at strangers who stared too long. "They don't mean harm," he said once, when a woman flinched at her accent. "They just don't know what you've been through." Liesl smiled thinly. "Neither do you," she said, not unkindly. That night he found her translating old letters from German to English. "So I can learn how to speak like someone who is afraid," she explained, and he understood more than he let on. Across the country, the German war brides became curiosities in their neighborhoods. Newspapers ran human interest pieces. Former enemy women find new lives as American wives. Some readers sent congratulations, others sent hate. Anna's mailbox held both. Frank found one angry note tucked beneath a cookbook, ripped it up, and fed it to the fire. "They'll learn," he muttered. Anna watched the ashes curl and thought of her classroom in Wartburg, chalk dust glittering in ruined windows. "Or they won't," she said. But there were mercies. The brides formed quiet circles, coffee in kitchens, letters shared between states. They traded recipes and practiced English. They taught their children lullabies from the old country. Suspicion slowly turned into curiosity, curiosity into friendship. Neighbors asked for strudel lessons. Churches hosted friendship Sundays. Kids grew up bilingual, their laughter a living peace treaty. Not all wounds closed. Greta overheard James's father say, "Never thought I'd see the day a German woman raised my grandkids." She smiled at breakfast. Her hands shook when she poured milk. Some nights Frank woke from Normandy. Anna held him until dawn and whispered, "You came home! You came home!" Liesel fought her battles in silence, correcting insults with flawless English until there was nothing left to correct. By 1949, the stories had spread. Congress recorded over 70,000 European war brides, more than 14,000 from Germany alone. Some marriages didn't last. Historians later estimated 1 in 5 German-American war marriages failed by the mid-1950s. The rest endured quietly, stubbornly, like flowers blooming through concrete. Post-war diplomacy wasn't just speeches, it turned out. It was dinners and diapers and forgiveness practiced in kitchens. One summer evening in Kentucky, fireflies drifted over Frank's garden like tiny forgiving souls. Anna walked barefoot through the rows of corn. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. She remembered Wartburg's smoke-filled sky. "No," she said, "but I remember everything." Inside, the radio warned about a brewing conflict in Korea. The broadcaster's tone carried the same urgency she'd once heard in air raid sirens. She turned it off. The quiet of a single house in a peaceful county felt like a victory you never put in the paper. History, of course, never stops. Letters still arrived from Europe. Stories of brothers missing, mothers hungry, streets renamed, wounds reopened. One note came without a return address. Not all forgive. Not all forget. Anna folded it and slid it into a drawer with Frank's medals. The sea outside her dreams began to rise again. By the mid-1950s, the echoes of war faded into television noise. Cars lined suburban drives. Children who had never seen Europe played under skies that had never known bombers. Yet the past lived in softened accents and recipes measured by memory. Anna Keller Miller stood on her Kentucky porch one humid evening, watching her daughter chase fireflies. Frank's uniform had long since been traded for work boots. His medals slept beside her letters from Wartburg. Neighbors no longer stared. Sometimes an older man paused half a beat too long before greeting her, as if still measuring a ghost. The school called her Mrs. Miller now, and when she corrected her students' English, few noticed the German vowels that came back when she was tired. Further west, Greta stocked shelves in the hardware store she and James ran. Her boys, now lanky teens, spoke perfect Midwestern English and understood German only when she sang. She didn't wear morning black anymore. She wore cotton dresses and laughed easily. Still, at baseball games, she sometimes saw the faces of the church basement children she'd taught in Bavaria, the ones who vanished into orphan trains and rubble. Liesel worked as a secretary in Chicago. Her hair was shorter, her smile was sharper. She and Jack built a life of music and motion, and friends who never asked about the past unless invited. There were cracks neither named. Jack woke sweating sometimes. When fear grabbed her throat, Liesel still counted silently in German. Forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't a one-time gesture. It was a discipline. In 1958, Frank suggested they go back. "You've earned it," he told Anna. "See it as something other than rubble." She was afraid to return, afraid to find it destroyed, or worse, rebuilt without her. In spring, they boarded a Pan Am flight. From the air, Germany looked healed. Green fields, red roofs, church spires rising from towns rebuilt by hands that had once carried bricks in buckets. In Wartburg, a gray-haired janitor recognized her instantly. "Fräulein Keller," he whispered, eyes shining. "You came home." She smiled sadly. "No," she said. "I came to remember." Greta's reckoning arrived in a different uniform. Her 16-year-old son joined the Army Reserve. When he put on the crisp jacket for the first time, pride tangled with dread in her chest. "It's different now, Mama," he said. "We're the good guys." She smiled. That night she dreamed of trains, the kind that promise safety and deliver loss. Liesel's turn came at a veterans' reunion. She wore pearls and a navy dress. The hall was full of laughter and old stories. When a man at their table learned she was German, his jaw tightened. "My brother died at Bastogne," he said. "I suppose your people sent the bullets." The air froze. Liesel met his gaze. "And my husband sent the forgiveness," she said evenly. Shame softened his anger. In the cab home, Jack kissed her hand. "You shouldn't have to fight anymore." She smiled. "We all keep fighting something." The Cold War redrew borders. New enemies rose. The children of the war brides learned to watch rockets, not ration lines. Their lives weren't defined by ruins, but by homework and halftime shows. Still, the quiet legacy remained. They had learned suspicion into empathy, and they built bridges not with treaties but with dinners, laughter, and love. One autumn afternoon, a letter arrived in Kentucky from Wartburg. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from Clara, a former student, now a teacher. "Your name is still spoken here," it read. "The school was rebuilt. The children remember the songs you taught them." Enclosed was a faded photograph of a schoolyard filled with smiling faces. Anna pressed it to her chest. Peace, not perfect, but something like it, settled for a moment in her bones. Years later, a local journalist gathered 3 women for an article about war brides who changed America. They sat on a porch, drinking iced tea, watching children play in the yard. "Do you regret it?" the reporter asked. Greta shook her head. "Regret means you wish for another life. I only wish for peace." Liesel laughed softly. "I found it the hard way." Anna looked at the evening sky. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," she said. "It's choosing to see a face instead of a flag." The article ran with their photograph, 3 women smiling beneath an American sky. Readers saw warmth, resilience, grace. Few noticed the shadows in their eyes, the knowledge that peace is never simple, only earned. That night, as Anna folded laundry, a mail truck rattled down the lane. Another letter slid through the slot, addressed in careful, uncertain handwriting. From Wartburg School, class of 1946. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single line. "Thank you for teaching us words again when the world had forgotten how to speak." She pressed her fingers to the paper. Outside, her daughter's laughter lifted across the yard, and Anna, teacher, wife, immigrant, survivor, smiled, because in that sound, the war finally was quiet. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what part hit hardest. Did your family live through post-war Germany, Ellis Island, or the era of the War Brides Act? Share a memory. And if you want more true stories about ordinary people who rebuilt the world, subscribe, hit the bell, and send this video to someone who loves history that feels human.